Good evening, friends. Imagine this. The sun beats down on a rugged peninsula where the earth still bears the scars of battles long past. The air is thick with the scent of salt and dust, and in the distance the Aegean Sea whispers secrets to the shore. It's here, on the Gallipoli Peninsula in Turkey, where one of the most baffling mysteries of modern military history unfolded, not in the trenches of World War I, but in our own time, just last year, in 2025. You might recall the infamous tale from 1915 during the Dardanelles Campaign. A battalion from the British 1st 5th Norfolk Regiment, over 250 men, advanced into a mist-shrouded valley near Suvla Bay. Witnesses from New Zealand units reported seeing them march into a strange, low-hanging cloud that seemed to swallow them whole. When the mist lifted, the men were gone. No bodies, no equipment, no trace. Official records dismissed it as enemy action, but survivors swore it was something unnatural. Turkish forces later confirmed they never engaged that unit. It became legend, the vanished battalion. But what if history repeats itself? In 2025, as part of a NATO commemorative exercise marking the 110th anniversary of the landings, multinational forces, including a British contingent from the 1st Battalion, the Rifles, returned to Gallipoli. They set up temporary barracks near the old Anzac Cove, amid the preserved trenches and memorials. The exercise was routine, joint manoeuvres, historical reenactments, and cultural exchanges with Turkish allies. Yet, over the course of 2 weeks, reports emerged of eerie occurrences. Shadowy figures in outdated uniforms, unexplained whispers in the night, and then vanishings. A squad of 12 British soldiers disappeared during a night patrol, their gear left behind as if they'd simply stepped out of existence. These aren't campfire tales. They're drawn from declassified after-action reports, eyewitness accounts, and interviews with serving personnel who requested anonymity. I've cross-referenced them with official MOD statements, which attribute the incidents to environmental factors or navigational errors. But the soldiers who were there tell a different story, one laced with the paranormal, where the ghosts of 1915 seem to reach across time. Tonight we'll hear their testimonies, pieced together like fragments of a shattered helmet. Why do these echoes persist? What force lingers in those trenches? Stay with me as we delve into the haunted barracks of Gallipoli, where the line between past and present blurs into something far more sinister. Chapter 1. Arrival at Anzac Cove. Sergeant Tom Hargrove here, Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, the Rifles. I'd been in the job long enough to know when the ground beneath your boots felt wrong. Helmand dust storms, Syrian urban sprawl, even the frozen mud of Estonia during NATO exercises. But nothing prepared me for Gallipoli in April 2025. We'd staged out of Istanbul, then caught a Turkish army EMOM, 17 down to Çanakkale province. The peninsula unfolded below us like an old sepia photograph come to life. Steep ridges scarred by century-old trenches, scrub-covered hillsides studded with white stone memorials, and the Aegean glittering cold and indifferent under a pale spring sun. The pilot banked low over Suvla Bay. "Giant!" For a moment, I swear, the wind carried the ghost of distant bugles. Probably just engine noise, but it set my teeth on edge. Our temporary base was established near Anzac Cove itself, a restricted UNESCO site, so everything had to be low impact. We erected modular tents on levelled ground behind Hesco bastions, strung razor wire along the perimeter, more for protocol than threat, and dug slit trenches for the latrines because nobody wanted to truck waste across sacred soil. The mess tent sat under heavy camouflage netting, serving hot chai alongside MRS and the occasional care package of Tim Tams from the Aussies. Our multi-terrain pattern combats were already streaked with the fine white dust that gets into everything. Boots, rifle barrels, lungs. The purpose was commemoration wrapped in training, a multinational exercise marking 110 years since the 1915 landings. British, Turkish, Australian and New Zealand forces ran joint amphibious drills, historical battlefield studies and ceremonial parades. We practiced beach assaults with landing craft, cleared mock minefields through preserved trench lines, and stood shoulder to shoulder at dawn services. Interoperability was the buzzword. Building trust, sharing tactics, honouring the dead. Simple enough on paper. But from the moment our boots hit the shingle at Anzac Cove, the place pressed in on you. Not hostile, like a live combat zone, but watchful, heavy. Like the peninsula itself remembered every scream, every bayonet charge, and wasn't quite ready to let go. Private Liam Ellis noticed it first. Fresh out of Catterick, barely 20, and still carrying that recruit shine on his SA-80. During our initial reconnaissance patrol, mapping routes, checking comms relays, he froze on a ridge overlooking the old no-man's land. "Sarge," he hissed, pointing downslope. "Figures on the far hill. Turkish recce?" I raised my binos. Nothing but wind-bent Mackie scrub and the Lone Pine Memorial in the distance. "Heat shimmer, Ellis. Eyes playing tricks. Focus on the task." He lowered his weapon, but kept glancing back. That night, in the troop tent, the whispers started. Not wind through guy ropes, distinct, rhythmic, like men murmuring orders just beyond the canvas walls. I stepped outside, NVGs down, scanning the perimeter with my weapon light. Empty, no heat blooms, no movement. Back inside, Lance Corporal Reyes was already on the radios. "Checked the Frex twice, Sarge. No bleed over, and no Turkish chatter, nothing. Gears green." I nodded, but sleep didn't come easy. Around 0300 I heard it clearly. Footsteps crunching gravel outside, deliberate military pace. I grabbed my rifle, slipped out. Nothing. Just the moon on the sea and the low hum of the generator. When I returned, Ellis was sitting up in his cot, pale. "Sarge." I saw him again, bloke in an old slouch hat, standing right at the wire, staring straight at me. Then he just wasn't there. "Get your head down, lad," I told him. "Long day tomorrow." But I didn't believe my own words. The air had thickened, carrying a metallic tang like cordite long after the firing stopped. Next morning, Captain Wells called us in for O Group. He stood in front of the sand table map, voice level but edged. "This ground has history, gentlemen. Heavy history. We respect it. No unnecessary risks. No wandering off alone after dark. Buddy system stays in force. Questions?" None came. But as we filed out, Ellis caught my sleeve. "Sarge, those footsteps, they weren't ours. And the whispers. They're saying names, like calling a roll call from a century ago." I looked at him hard. "Imagination, Ellis. The sight's got weight. It'll pass." But it didn't. By evening, the footsteps returned, circling the barracks tents like sentries who never stood down. Patrols swept the perimeter. Nothing. No tracks in the dust. No disturbed wire. just that persistent low murmur drifting up from the old trenches below. I lay in my cot that night, listening to the wind, or whatever it was, whispering through the guy lines. The peninsula was breathing, and something in those preserved trenches was waking up. Little did any of us know how deep those echoes ran, or how many of us it would claim before the exercise ended. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Dark, 698 words. Corporal Meyer Langley here, medic attached to Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, the Rifles. My role on this Gallipoli deployment was straightforward on paper. Keep the lads operational. Treat the inevitable blisters from long patrols in those heavy combat boots. Hand out paracetamol for the headaches that come from too much sun and not enough hydration. Run IVS if dehydration hit hard, and be ready to stabilize anything worse if the exercise somehow went pear-shaped. We weren't in a live combat zone. This was a commemorative NATO multinational training event marking 110 years since the 1915 landings. But protocol demanded the medical tent stay fully kitted. Trauma kits open. Morphine syrettes counted, defibrillator charged and tested daily, IV lines coiled and ready. Standard drill. The temporary barracks sat tucked behind HESCO barriers near Anzac Cove, on ground that had been levelled just enough to pitch modular tents without disturbing the UNESCO-protected soil too much. By day, the place felt almost serene. White memorials gleaming on the ridges, Turkish and Commonwealth flags snapping in the breeze, the Aegean rolling blue and calm below. You could almost forget the history if you tried, but after lights out, especially past 0200, when the katabatic wind funneled up from Suvla Bay, the atmosphere shifted. The peninsula seemed to exhale. It began subtly. I'd be doing night inventory, checking sterile dressings, logging controlled drugs, when the sound drifted in, a low murmur seeping through the canvas like distant radio traffic. At first, I wrote it off as wind whistling through the old trench lines that ran within 30 metres of our perimeter. Those World War I features were still intact. Communication saps, firing bays, collapsed dugouts half filled with chalk and scrub. The acoustics were perfect for channeling noise, but the murmurs had structure, pauses, cadence. They weren't random gusts. They sounded like men speaking in hushed tones during a night watch. British accents, clipped and formal, occasionally something closer to Australian drawl. I stepped outside once, NVGs flipped down, surefire in a low grip, sweeping 360. Nothing moved, just moonlight silvering the sea and black shadows pooling in the old no-man's land below. Up then, Private Ellis stumbled into the med tent around 0330 on night 3, face drained, eyes wide. "Corp," he whispered, "I can't rack out. Those voices, they're running a roll call, names. Private Wilkins, present. Lance Corporal Hayes, absent." Over and over. It's doing my head in. I sat him on a camp stool, took vitals, pulse 108, BP elevated but stable, no fever, pupils reactive. "Breathe, Ellis. Here." I passed him a brew from the jet boil. While the steam rose, I listened. And there it was again, unmistakable. "Norfolk. Form on the markers. Into the mist." Goosebumps rippled under my combat shirt. I keyed the radio. "CP, this is Medic Langley. Anomalous audio reported inside barracks perimeter, Sector 4. Sounds like human voices, low volume. Request permission to probe." Captain Wells responded immediately. Voice tight. Negative, Langley. Hold position. QRF on 5 minutes standby. Log the incident, monitor, report any escalation. I logged it in the Green Book, but rest wasn't coming. Around 0415, I stepped out again, telling myself it was psychosomatic. Collective suggestion from the historic weight of the place. That's when I saw the figure. 50 metres out on the low ridge, backlit by a 3/4 moon. Tall, gaunt, wearing what looked like a 1915 greatcoat. Collar turned up against the chill. Puttees wrapped tight around the calves. He stood perfectly still, facing our tent line. "Halt," I challenged, parade ground volume. "Identify yourself. NATO forces. State your intent." No reply. He turned slowly. Moonlight caught his features for a split second. Hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, the 1,000-yard stare of a man who'd seen too much trench mud and shrapnel. Then a sudden gust tore across the hill, the silhouette blurred like smoke, and he vanished. No retreat, no rustle in the muckies. Just empty slope. I hit the Pressel again. CP. Visual contact. Possible intruder. Period uniform. Sector 4 Ridge. QRF. Now. They deployed fast. 6-man team. Weapons hot. Thermals scanning. Full sweep. Nothing. No tracks in the powdery dust. No broken twigs. No residual heat on the FLIR. Lance Corporal Reyes pulled footage from the exercise CCTV we'd emplaced. Grainy infrared showed only static interference during the exact 30-second window. Back inside, Ellis hadn't moved. "You saw it, didn't you, Corp?" I met his eyes. "Yeah, I saw something." Next morning, during the joint historical brief, our Turkish liaison major, Demir, spoke offhand. "The peninsula keeps its ghosts close. Fishermen avoid certain waters after dark. They say the mist claims those who forget respect. Jinn, or simply the land, refusing to release its dead." Wells cut across politely. "Thank you, Major. We're focused on training and remembrance here." But I caught the flicker in the CO's expression. Uncertainty creeping in. That night the whispers intensified. They no longer stayed outside. They seeped into the tents, circling the cots, reciting names in that same measured Edwardian tone. "Section advance, fix bayonets, over the top." Ellis sat bolt upright. "They're saying our names now, Corp." I heard Ellis clear as day. I had no reassuring answer. Only another incident report, another perimeter check, and the growing certainty that whatever lingered in those preserved trenches wasn't folklore, and it was only just beginning to reach for us. Chapter 3. Shadows on Patrol Lance. Corporal Raj Patel, point man for the section in Bravo Company 1st Rifles. My job was simple. Lead from the front. Eyes sharp, weapon ready. Keep the patrol moving without surprises. I'd done countless patrols in places where the ground tried to kill you. Kabul outskirts, Mali, dust bowls. But Gallipoli's terrain in April 2025 felt different. Not actively hostile, but aware. Like the Earth was listening. We geared up before first light on day 5 of the exercise. Standard loadout, SA-80A3 with ACOG and suppressor. Range rules. Osprey body armor plates in, 40mm, underslung grenade launcher, empty for safety, Bergen light with water, ammo, and IR strobes. Sergeant Hargrove gave the brief in the command tent. Trace the old Allied advance lines from Anzac Cove towards Suvla. Practice fire and maneuver through preserved trench systems. Note any UXO markers. Return by 1100 for joint debrief with the Turks and Aussies. Eyes on, Weapons low. Respect the memorials. No shortcuts. We moved out single file. Me on point, Ellis behind, then Reyes on comms, Hargrove bringing up the rear. The path followed a marked historical trail. Gravel crunching under our boots. Low scrub brushing against our trousers. Dawn light filtered through thin clouds, turning everything golden grey. You could see the scars. Shallow depressions where shell holes had never fully filled, faint zigzag lines of old firing bays snaking across hillsides. Signs in Turkish and English warned, "Do not disturb soil." Impossible, unexploded ordnance. Halfway up toward Chunuk Bear Ridge, the fog came in fast. Not the slow sea mist you expect off the Aegean. This rolled down the valleys like it had purpose, thick, white, swallowing sound and sight. Visibility dropped from kilometres to 10 metres in under 2 minutes. Hargrove's voice crackled over the personal roll radio. "Halt, consolidate. Check NVGs if needed." I flipped my PVS-14 down. Green world, but the thermal overlay showed cold spots drifting like smoke. "Sarge, thermals picking up anomalies. Moving parallel, left flank." We froze. Through the NVGs, shapes resolved. Men in khaki, puttees, Brody helmets, bayonets fixed on long Lee Enfields. They marched in extended line, silent except for the faint crunch of boots that matched our own rhythm but wasn't ours. Translucent, edges flickering like bad video feed, yet solid enough that the fog parted around them. "Contact left," I whispered, thumb safety off, finger indexed. "Not hostiles. Ghosts." Hargrove edged forward. "Affirm. Hold fire. Observe only." The spectral platoon kept pace, maybe 20 metres away, faces set in that grim determination you see in old photos. Young men knowing the odds but advancing anyway. One turned his head toward me. Eyes met mine through the NVGs, hollow, weary but alive with something urgent. His mouth moved, forming words without sound. "Into the mist. Don't follow." Then the formation veered right, disappearing into a low dip where the old communication trench ran. The fog thickened further, GPS on my wrist spinning uselessly, digital compass tumbling like it was drunk. Comms hissed static. Ellis hissed behind me. "Sarge, they're the Norfolks, the vanished ones, from the book, the cloud that swallowed them." Hargrove's tone stayed level. "Steady, lads. We RTB now, double time if the fog lifts." We backtracked carefully, weapons up, sweeping arcs. The cold spots on thermal lingered behind us, following at a distance, never closing. When we finally broke clear near the barracks perimeter, the sun had burned off most of the mist, but our gear felt heavier, like the cold had seeped into the plates. Back at camp, Hargrove debriefed Captain Wells in private first, then us. Thermals captured cold anomalies consistent with human-sized shapes, and no heat, no solid returns. GPS and comms glitched during contact. Official report: environmental interference, possible mass hallucination from sight fatigue. Wells nodded slowly. "Log it. No speculation in the AAR, but keep it in the back of your minds." That night in the barracks tent, the whispers returned, louder, clearer. Names, dates. Section, advance, fix bayonets. And now, threaded through them, our own call signs. "Point man Patel, hold the line." I lay awake, staring at the canvas ceiling, rifle within reach. The peninsula wasn't just remembering 1915. It was reaching out, testing us, seeing if we'd step into the mist like they had. And part of me wondered if we already had. Chapter 4. The First Disappearance. Private Liam Ellis speaking. I was the youngest in the section, barely turned 21, straight out of Phase 2 training at Catterick Garrison, posted to Bravo Company just 3 months before we deployed to Gallipoli. They called me the kid half the time, but I didn't mind, and I wanted to prove I belonged. That meant keeping my head down, doing my drill sharp, and never letting the older lads see me rattled. Easier said than done on that peninsula. By the second week of the 2025 commemorative exercise, the barracks felt different. The modular tents, once crisp and orderly, now sagged under an invisible pressure. Dust coated everything thicker than before. The HESCO barriers seemed to lean inward at night. Lads stopped joking about the history. Instead, we spoke in low voices about the footsteps that circled after lights out, the cold spots that drifted through the canvas, the way the whispers had started using our names. It happened on the night of day 12. I drew stag duty with Corporal Langley, 0200 to 0600, at the forward observation post overlooking Anzac Cove. The OP was basic. Sandbags, a low berm, tripod-mounted binos, and a radio linked back to the command tent. We had thermals, NVGs, and a flask of tea that had gone lukewarm hours earlier. The sea was flat black under a sliver moon. The old landing beach stretched pale below us like a scar. Langley was solid, calm under pressure, always had a spare bandage or a quiet word when someone was fraying. She handed me the flask. Sip slow, Ellis. Night's long. We scanned in sectors. Nothing moved except the occasional seabird. Then the fog came again, thicker than before, rolling up from Suvla like it was poured from a bucket. It swallowed the memorials first, then the ridges, then us. Visibility dropped to arm's length. The thermals showed only swirling cold. Footsteps started, not one set, multiple. Heavy, deliberate, coming up the old communication trench below the OP. Langley challenged immediately. Halt! NATO forces! Identify yourself! Silence. Then a rush of wind carrying voices. Form up! Charge! Over the top! I swung my surefire torch, beam cutting white tunnels through the murk. Shapes flickered at the edge of the light. Khaki tunics, webbing, fixed bayonets glinting. Dozens of them, advancing in extended line, like they were still going for the Turkish trenches in 1915. Their faces were pale, mouths open in silent shouts. One reached out, hand passing straight through the sandbag in front of me. The cold hit like dipping my arm in ice water. Corp, they're here, I yelled, voice cracking. Langley keyed the radio. CP, this is OP1. Multiple contacts, spectral, advancing from trench line. Comms check, over. Static answered. She tried again. Nothing. The fog pressed in tighter. The voices grew louder, overlapping. Norfolk, fix bayonets, into the mist. I backed up, rifle raised, safety off. Langley grabbed my shoulder. Hold position, don't engage, just observe. But the figures closed. One stopped directly in front of her. Tall, gaunt, greatcoat flapping, though there was no wind. His eyes locked on hers. He raised a hand as if to salute or beckon. Langley froze. What do you want? She whispered. The figure's mouth moved. No sound came out, but I swear I read the words. Join us. Then the fog surged. Langley stepped forward, one pace, involuntary, like she'd been pulled. Her boot scuffed the gravel. I lunged to grab her arm. My fingers closed on empty air. She was gone. Rifle still slung across her chest, helmet on the ground where she'd stood, torch rolling slowly down the slope until it winked out. No scream, no struggle, no tracks. Just her Bergen sitting upright, as if she'd set it down for a moment and stepped away. I stood there, heart hammering, staring at the spot. The fog thinned almost instantly, like a curtain drawn back. The figures had vanished with it. I bolted back to the barracks, boots pounding, raising the alarm over the net, even though I knew comms were dead. "Contact! Corporal Langley missing! Spectral contacts! OP1!" The quick reaction force spilled out. Hargrove at the front, weapons up. They swept the OP, found exactly what I'd left. Her rifle, helmet, untouched brew flask, still warm. No blood, no drag marks, no sign of a fight. Drones launched at first light. Ground teams combed every trench line within a kilometre. Nothing. Captain Wells debriefed me in the command tent at 0700. His face was grey. "Walk me through it again, Private. Every detail." I told him. The footsteps, the shapes, the cold hand, the way she just stepped forward and wasn't there. He listened without interrupting, then stared at the sand table map for a long minute. "We'll find her," he said finally. But his voice lacked conviction. Back in the troop tent that afternoon, the lads sat in silence. Someone had placed Langley's helmet on her empty cot. No one touched it. That night the whispers returned, louder than ever. They weren't reciting old roles anymore. They were calling her name. And then, slowly, they started calling mine. Chapter 5. Echoes of the Past, Sergeant Tom Hargrove again. After Corporal Langley vanished from the OP, the barracks compound turned into something between a siege mentality and a graveyard watch. Captain Wells ordered full lockdown, no solo movements. Buddy system mandatory, even for the latrines. Floodlights left burning all night on generator power, and every sentry doubled up with thermals and NVGs. The exercise was effectively suspended. HQ in Sanakale radioed back that operational tempo would be reduced pending investigation. But evac wasn't authorized yet. We were told to hold position, document everything, and await further orders. In other words, sit tight while the peninsula kept taking pieces of us. The hauntings didn't pause for protocol. If anything, they accelerated. By day 13, objects in the tents started moving on their own. Rations would be found, rearranged into neat stacks that mimicked 1915 field-issue tins. Someone's combat boots, left unlaced at the foot of a cot, would be discovered laced in the old putty style, cross-gartered tight as if ready for a bayonet charge. Personal kit went missing for hours, only to reappear in impossible places. Dog tags dangling from tent poles. ID cards tucked inside MRE wrappers like hidden orders. The whispers were constant now. They no longer waited for darkness. They seeped through the canvas in broad daylight, low and insistent, reciting fragments of old war diaries. Mist came down, sudden, swallowed the line. No shots fired. Sometimes they broke into parade ground commands. Section, advance at the double. Other times they named the missing Langley, present, or accounted for, followed by a long, hollow silence. Private Patel came to me around 2,200 on the 14th night. He was shaking, something I'd never seen from the lad who'd held point through 3 separate fog contacts without flinching. "Sarge," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "I can't stay in the tent. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that trench dip. The ghosts are closer. They're waiting." I told him to rack out near the command post under the floodlights. He nodded, but didn't move. Instead, he pulled out his phone. Personal device, against regs, but everyone had one, and showed me a photo he'd taken during the earlier patrol. Grainy, but clear enough. A row of translucent figures standing shoulder to shoulder in the mist. Faces turned toward the camera. One in the centre looked almost like Langley. Same build, same way she carried her shoulders. But the uniform was wrong. 1915 issue. Before I could say anything, the whispers shifted. They stopped reciting history and started calling live names. Patel, Raj Patel, fall in. Clear as if someone stood at the tent flap reading from a nominal roll. Patel went rigid. That's me, Sarge. They're saying my name. I grabbed my rifle, stepped outside. The compound was lit like day. Floods on stands, vehicle headlights angled outward. But the fog was creeping in again, low along the ground, pooling around the HESCO barriers like floodwater. No figures visible yet, but the cold spots on the thermals were multiplying. I keyed the net. All call signs, this is Hargrove. Anomalous audio targeting individuals. Stay in pairs, weapons ready, report any visual. Reyes answered from the signals tent. Sarge, comms glitching again. GPS down, sat phone dropping packets. We're blind to outside. Then the scream came, not from the perimeter, but inside the barracks line, from Patel's section tent. I ran. Lads were already spilling out, half-dressed, rifles in hand. Inside, Patel's cot was empty. His Bergen sat upright, webbing still clipped, sleeping bag unzipped, as if he'd just stepped out for a piss. His tags lay on the ground sheet, chains snapped clean like someone had yanked them off. No blood, no disturbance, just gone. We searched the tent, then the compound. Drones up immediately. Thermal sweeps showed nothing but our own heat signatures and those drifting cold voids that never quite resolved into shapes. Ground teams swept the nearest trenches. At the edge of the old Suvla communication line, one of the lads found Patel's tags half buried in the chalk soil, as if placed there deliberately. Wells arrived, face like stone. How long between last sighting and alarm? Less than 90 seconds, I told him. He was with me. Then the whispers called him. Then he was gone. The CEO stared at the tags in his palm. We're pulling back at first light, full evac. I'm not losing another one. But as he spoke, the fog thickened around the barracks. Shadows moved at the edges of the floodlight pools. Tall figures in greatcoats, motionless, watching. The whispers rose to a murmur that filled the entire compound. Echoes of the past joined the line. I felt it then, the pull. Not physical, but something deeper, like the weight of every man who'd marched into that mist in 1915 was pressing on my chest, urging me to step forward to answer the role. We held position through the night, weapons up, lights blazing, but we all knew the truth. The peninsula wasn't finished remembering, and it had our names on the list. Chapter 6. The Vanishing Squad. Captain Edward Wells, Commanding Officer, Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, the Rifles. I took command of that exercise detachment, believing the greatest threats would be heat exhaustion, navigational errors on historic ground, and the usual friction of multinational ops. By day 15 of the 2025 Gallipoli commemoration, those concerns had been replaced by something far worse. We had lost Corporal Langley and Private Patel without trace. The barracks compound, once a functional forward operating base, was now a lit-up fortress under siege by silence and fog. Evac clearance had finally come through from higher. First light, rotary lift to Sanakale, then out of theatre. But before we could board, I needed answers. I needed to probe the anomaly one last time. I gathered the remaining section leaders at 2100 in the command tent. 12 men volunteered for what I called an armed reconnaissance patrol. Final sweep of the old Suvla approach trenches to document thermal anomalies and attempt comms relay placement for better coverage. In truth, it was closure. If we could capture clear evidence, video, multiple sensor hits, perhaps HQ would treat this as more than mass hysteria or environmental factors. We moved out at 2300 under full moon, kit stripped to essentials. SA-80s, plate carriers, IR patches, personal roll radios set to encrypted burst. Sergeant Hargrove led point with his section. I walked centre with the signals NCO. The floodlights from the barracks cast long shadows behind us as we crossed the perimeter wire and descended into the preserved trench lines. The fog arrived within minutes. Thicker, faster, colder than previous nights. It rolled down the gullies like living smoke, swallowing NVG amplification into green murk. Thermals showed a wall of blue-black cold advancing. Comms crackled once, then died. GPS needles spun lazy circles. Then the battalion appeared. Not a platoon, not shadows. This was company strength, maybe more. Khaki tunics, puttees, slouch hats, and Brody helmets mixed, bayonets fixed, marching in extended order across the open ground to our front. They were translucent yet detailed, webbing straps taut, ammunition pouches bulging, faces pale and fixed forward. No sound except the rhythmic crunch of phantom boots on chalk that matched our own footfalls. "Hold," I ordered, voice low. Weapons came up instinctively, but fingers stayed indexed. No one fired. We watched as the spectral line advanced, parallel, never closing the gap. One figure near the centre turned his head, eyes locking on mine. The stare carried weight, recognition, warning, invitation. The fog surged. Cold enveloped us like stepping into a freezer. Men began to falter. Private after private stepped forward, one pace, then another, drawn as if on invisible strings. Hargrove shouted, "Fall back! Regroup on me!" But his voice sounded distant, muffled. I grabbed the nearest man's plate carrier, yanked him back. He blinked, shook his head, stayed with us. Others weren't so lucky. One by one, 8 of the 12 melted into the mist. No struggle, no cries. They simply walked into the formation and vanished, swallowed as cleanly as if they'd stepped through a door. Gear remained, rifles clattering to the ground, Bergens dropping, helmets rolling. I screamed the fallback order again. The 4 of us who held ran, blind through the fog, guided by memory and the faint glow of barracks, floods on the ridge. We burst through the wire, gasping, weapons still up. Behind us, the spectral battalion halted. They stood motionless for a long moment, then faded as the fog lifted. Silence returned, broken only by the hum of generators. We accounted for the missing at dawn. No bodies, no tracks beyond our own. Just empty cots, an untouched kit waiting like memorials. I radioed the final sitrep myself. Anomalous mass disappearance. 8 MIAs. Recommend immediate full evac. Our sight no longer tenable. The choppers came at first light. As we lifted off, I looked down at the empty barracks compound, the silent trenches, the peninsula stretching quiet under the rising sun. It had taken what it wanted. and the mist still lingered in the valleys below. Chapter 7. The final night, Lance Corporal Diego Reyes, Signal Specialist, Bravo Company, 1st Rifles. I was the one who stayed plugged in, trying to keep comms alive while everything else fell apart. After the patrol vanished into the mist, only 4 of us made it back. Captain Wells, Sergeant Hargrove, myself, and 1 other private who hadn't spoken since. The barracks compound felt hollow. Empty cots lined up like accusations. Floodlights burned all night, generators growling to keep them fed. We'd been ordered to hold until first light evac. Chinooks inbound at 0600. But the hours between midnight and dawn stretched into something endless. The whispers didn't whisper anymore. They roared. A constant, overlapping murmur that filled the tents, seeped through sandbags, vibrated in our chest plates. Names, hundreds of them, rolled out in that measured Edwardian cadence. Wilkins, Hayes, Norfolk, advance. Then our own. Reyes, hold the line, fall in. They weren't asking, they were mustering. Around 0230, the tents began to shake. Not wind, something rhythmic, like distant artillery, but close. Canvas snapped against poles, guy lines twanged. Shadows danced on the walls, even though the floods were steady outside. I sat at the signals desk, laptop open, trying to force a SAT burst to HQ. Screen flickered. Our battery icons drained in seconds, despite full charge. Then the power cut. Lights died. Generators coughed once and quit. Silence fell, thick, unnatural. We grabbed weapons, NVGs down, formed a defensive perimeter inside the wire. Hargrove called soft orders. 2-man teams, cover arcs. No one steps outside the lights. But the fog was already inside the compound, low, creeping between tents like floodwater, cold enough to frost our breath. Then the figures appeared. Not on the ridge this time, inside the lines. Pale soldiers in greatcoats and puttees materialized between the HESCO barriers, standing at parade rest. Faces gaunt, eyes hollow, wounds visible. Shrapnel tears, bayonet gashes that didn't bleed. One stepped forward, tall officer's insignia faint on his collar. He raised a hand in salute. Mouth moved, no sound. But the words were clear in my head. The trenches call, the mist awaits. Panic hit. One private bolted straight toward the figure. He vanished mid-stride, kit clattering empty to the ground. Another followed, then another. They didn't scream. They just walked forward, drawn, and were gone. Hargrove grabbed my arm. Reyes, stay with me. We hold here. I nodded, rifle up, but my hands shook. The spectral line advanced slowly, bayonets glinting under floodlight glare that shouldn't have reached them. The whispers became a chant. Join the roll. Present. Absent. Wells shouted from the command tent doorway, "Fall back to the helo, LZ! Move!" We ran, stumbling over dropped Bergens, boots slipping on frost that hadn't been there an hour before. The fog thickened, swallowing the tents behind us. More shadows rose from the ground, hundreds now, marching in formation, closing the gap. I glanced back once. The compound was emptying, cots bare, gear untouched, only the 4 of us left running. We reached the LZ, a cleared patch near the cove, as the first rotor thump echoed from the south. Chinooks breaking cloud, spotlights stabbed down. We waved IR strobes screaming into the wind. The ghosts halted at the wire. They stood motionless, watching as the birds touched down. Dust swirled, ramps dropped. We scrambled aboard, last ones out. As we lifted, I looked down. The barracks sat silent under the moon, floodlights still burning, tents sagging empty. The fog lingered in the valleys, thick and patient. The peninsula watched us go. We left nothing behind but echoes, and the mist kept its secrets.